Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black Revolutionary Theater Workshop's September Melanated Monday. My name is Bianca, and I will be your MC for tonight. For this month's show, we have 3 insightful plays by BRTW's community members, along with a community conversation featuring a special guest. Before we jump into programming, I want to take some time to tell you who we are and what we're doing this month, starting with our mission statement. BRTW exists to disrupt any and all oppressive systems that marginalize Black people, using narrative and performance as a methodology to recenter Black people and experiences. With economic, social, educational, healthcare, housing, and political injustice facing our community, BRTW aims to tackle the issues that impact us while becoming a beacon for Black opportunity within the arts. Melanated Mondays are a monthly writing and performance salon highlighting a different theme at the intersection of Black justice and civic engagement. This month's theme is ACAB. Police brutality does not exist in one form. This month we'll explore the many ways in which police brutality manifests and broaden our understanding of the concept. By the end of the show, we hope to gain a deeper understanding and walk away from our conversation with tools to cope. This Melanated Monday can be particularly triggering as this show does center police brutality. As always, please take care of yourselves. And with that, we will jump into our programming. Our first piece is You Feel Me by Chamari White Mink. This will be read by Cyril Amanfo.
I know you can see me. I'm right here. Plastered all over your news feed. You see stories about me. Headline after headline, article after article, think piece after think piece. You see me. Art installations, roadways, hats, masks. I'm plastered on your shirt like a celebrity. I'm unavoidable. And yet, you still find a way to ignore me, to silence me, to forget me. Every time you forget, I die a new death. Did you know that? Did you? That I die a unique, acute, unrelenting death. You know why? It's because death, true, unadulterated death, is the absence of justice. There is no justice in Black death. No, this happened for a reason. No higher purpose. No justice, no peace. Just darkness and pain and fear. No one can live forever. But those who die, my kind of death, have never lived. They have only died. I know there will be no justice for me. And if there's no justice for me, there's no justice for anybody. Dying is slow and painful and cruel, knowing that your next breath will be your last, and feeling that, feeling your last breath over and over and over again. How could I ever breathe? You say you can't breathe because I can't breathe, but I will never be able to breathe. I see you. I see the air that you inhale before a yawn, the quick gasp of breath when something surprises you, your lungs filling up and expelling air as you laugh, as you cry. You can breathe just fine. You keep telling me that I matter. Do I matter because you post about me on your Instagram story on your way to yoga class? Or do I matter because you write a statement about me in your email to your staff before you go out for lunch? Do I actually matter if you're a cop, a social worker, landlord, principal, doctor, lawyer, or a politician? Or will you always find a way to prove that I can't matter? And I never will. Save me your words. Save me your pity. Save me your post. And stop saying that I matter. You see me, but you can't hear me. You think you feel me, but you don't. You watch videos, you read essays, you talk to your friends, you scream and you cry, and then you fall silent. Your actions amount to nothing. And that's okay with you. You can't feel me. Because if you did, If you really did feel me, you'd be dead too.
Thank you, Cyril. That was really powerful. Our next piece is Murder He Tote by Miyako Gavia. Trigger warnings include strong language. Stage directions will be read by Kara Ennis. Charlie will be played by Fafa Nutsor. Renee/Fo Renee will be read by Sidi Matabula. Flo Man will be read by Ev Lundy, and Commercial Guy will be played by Cyril Manfo.
Scene: a film set made to look like a library. Charlie Whitburn, a smarmy-looking woman, walks out slowly in a suit.
Violence, homicide, burglary, murder. These are all things that we rightfully fear and why we regularly rely on law enforcement to protect us. But what happens when they don't come in time? What happens when you're alone and scared and are forced to defend yourself with only your wits and intuition? Hi, I'm Charlie Bergman, and this is Murder He Tote, Deadly Baggage. Tonight's story, 25-year-old Renee Miller recounts her harrowing encounter.
Lights slowly up on a poorly skilled reenactor with a bad blonde wig. She wears oversized glasses and carries an NPR tote bag. The faux Renee follows along, pantomiming what real Renee says.
It was a pretty hot day in July, and I was walking home from brunch. My friends asked if I wanted to catch a cab with them, but I lived in Williamsburg and they lived in the West Village, so I told them it didn't really make sense. I should have listened to them. Should have listened to myself. I was almost home, and then it started raining pretty heavy, so I just ran the last few blocks to my apartment and went inside to dry off. Then there was this man in the doorway. He was like darker complected, like he was black and he just didn't look familiar, and he didn't look like he had anywhere to be. And I was just really nervous. So I went upstairs to my apartment and looked out of my window, and there he was, just standing there. I mean, it was kind of hard to see him because it was still raining out, but I sat there and watched him for like 15 minutes and my heart was pounding, So I got up my courage and I went downstairs. Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?
Me? Oh, I'm just waiting for the bus.
Well, the bus stop is over there, so.
Yeah, but it's raining.
The stoop is not a bus stop.
It's not much protection from the rain.
But it's not a bus stop, it's private property. My apartment's not an umbrella.
Well, until the rain clears up, I'm not leaving.
Faux actors freeze.
We'll return with this thrilling conclusion after this commercial break.
Hey, you. Yes, you. The scared person sitting in the dark on your couch. Are you sure you locked your door? Are you sure? There could be a burglar sneaking in through your back door or climbing through your window to strangle your dog right this second. Quick, go check. Did you check? Well, you wouldn't need to if you had Youngstown brand home security system. The Youngstown system employs state-of-the-art audio, video, K9, GPS, DNA, and infrared technology to keep your family safe and secure. Everything that happens around your home will be tracked via our simple phone app and can be viewed with the push of a button. Watch your children come home from school. Watch the underpaid delivery man drop kick your package onto your stoop. Watch your partner bring their lover over to your house. What's more, the Youngstown brand home security system will also call the police for you when it detects possible criminal activity within your neighborhood. Those strange foreign kids from down the block won't dare rob your lawn gnome or steal your jobs, not on our watch. So what are you waiting for? Go to www.ytsecurity.com and use code MurderTote to get 15% off your installation costs. Buy it today before they kidnap your baby tonight.
Welcome back to Murder He Tote, Deadly Baggage. When we last left Renee Miller, she was in a fight for her life against a mysterious intruder.
My apartment is not an umbrella.
Well, until the rain lets up, I'm not leaving.
I'd never been so scared in my life. I didn't know what to do, so I pulled out my phone to call the police. And then the black man pulled out his phone and started recording me and calling me Rainy Stoop Sally and yelling at me and calling me racist. And I was just so scared that I maybe kind of sort of maybe raised my voice at the police. Listen, you motherfuckers, this Negro is on my porch looking shifty as fuck, and I want him off my property right fucking now.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
He steps off the stoop.
Wait, what are you doing?
Hailing a cab.
You can't get a cab.
You're calling the police. I'd rather not get shot, so guess what? I'm leaving.
He turns his back and puts out his hand for a cab.
And at that point, my fear ratcheted, like really ramped up. I couldn't let him get away. Or I couldn't get away from him. He had his hand raised, and I didn't know if he was gonna hit me, so I did the only thing that I could.
Faux Renee whacks the man over his head with her tote bag.
I hit him with my tote.
She looks around panicking, then drags Faux Man off stage.
So, anyway, when the police found his body a week later, they concluded that the tote bag taped to his hand was his, and it could have been used to attack me. It was so heavy, it could have been used to crush my skull if I hadn't crushed his first. I saved my own life with luck and intuition. The police failed me. I don't know what could have happened if I wasn't so quick. There are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of these NPR tote bags and an attacker who winds up at the bottom of the Hudson. But, I have Instagram and my friends and brunch. And that makes me grateful every day. It makes me grateful that I survived.
Thank you for joining us tonight on Murder He Tote, Deadly Baggage. Stay tuned for season premiere of Law & Order, UFO. Until next time, crime fans, sweet dreams.
End of play.
Thank you so much for that, guys. Our last piece will be Unrendered Aid, a monologue by Mildred Inez Lewis. Trigger warnings include brief depictions of gore. Stage directions will be read by C.D. Mathabula, and Renee will be played by myself.
Renee drinks a beer while lying on the bed with her shoes on. There's a suitcase beside her. When her husband opens the door, she turns off the television, clearly agitated.
Close the door. I don't want the kids to hear.
The sound of a door closing.
Let me speak. You always talk over me. It's a bad habit, but I can't take that today. I saw it. The whole thing. I've never once asked you about your work. I married a paramedic because I come from a family of cops. I wanted to know that when you walked out that door every day, you were going to be somebody's hero. My dad was a good cop. I'm not proud of it, but there were times we looked the other way. Baby, I never wanted that to be us. I watched the news for straight 5 hours. I couldn't stop. I haven't even fed the kids dinner. I couldn't take my eyes off that boy's blood seeping into the pavement, getting thick. There wasn't even a sheet over him. He was like roadkill. I hate thinking of stuff like this. But the thing that got me was he had that same stupid Pokemon shirt we bought for David last Christmas. It was tight around the middle in the same spot. That boy was meant to grow out of that soft belly. In my mind's eye, I could see him at 17 using that shirt as a rag while he's fixing his car, blasting the radio. I didn't see you until his mother started screaming from behind the barricade. All she wanted was to hold her son. She wanted to do what I would have done, shield her boy from the heat and from eyes with so much contempt and indifference. Sal, your baby girl asked me if you were going to take the mommy to her son. That broke me. I started praying with everything in me that you would do something. Nothing. You reached around the officer to check for a pulse, then busied yourself. How many notes do you have to take about a corpse? You're everything to us, but now tell me how you're gonna fix this so I can unpack and stay. Because I can't put together my man with a guy I just saw who not once in 5 hours even tried to render aid.
End monologue.
Thank you all so much to my actors for being in this show today. We're going to move on to our community conversation, but before we jump into that, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. And we are back from our brief break. So for this Melanated Monday, our community conversation will feature Jé Judson. I'm just going to read a short introduction for her. Jé is a social and behavioral scientist working at the intersection of structural racism, violence, and gender. Her research interrogates cultural support for policing and punishment, particularly how the discourses of anti-Blackness and misogynoir forecast and sustain racist policies and practices. Using person-centered storytelling, she hopes to show how policing negatively impacts individuals and communities across the life course, while advocating for ways to create safe communities without the carceral state. She earned her MPH and PhD from Tulane University, and her BA in Africana Studies from Oberlin College. Jé, welcome, welcome.
Hi. It's nice to
Hello.
be part of this conversation. Those were some dynamic performances, so I'm happy to watch those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So I read just a little spiel, a little bio of you, but would you like to add anything as like a little introduction to who you are?
I guess I tend to specifically focus on police brutality and Black women. I know that there's a lot of research and advocacy, particularly around Black men as victims of police brutality, and by and far they're the majority of the victims, even numerically, but Black women have particular stories and experiences that I think were worth highlighting. So that's what I've spent most of my time researching.
It's beautiful. That's really great. And definitely thoroughly appreciated that when I was kind of reading into a little bit of your work. I feel like the experience of police brutality for Black women isn't talked enough about, especially in the movement, as we have like these protests and fighting against these kind of these systems and these occurrences. So thank you so much for your work and all that you're doing and like being a part of this movement.
Thank you.
Yeah, so with that, we can jump into our questions. I guess my first one, speaking about the research that you've done research on the association between police brutality and how it has had an adverse effect on mental health and how it affects Black adults. Can you talk to us about your findings and the role that hypervigilance plays in this occurrence?
Yeah, so that particular work, was definitely a collective effort. So I was happy to be a part of that work. And so we were, building on a lot of the work that's already been done about how police brutality in all of its forms, whether it's deadly violence or stop and frisk and just sort of the daily harassment that people face, can deteriorate mental health, particularly of Black adults, Black children too. And so we wanted to see, what are the pathways to that impact? So is it just police brutality happens and then you end up with depression or anxiety? And what we found was that, it sort of goes through this pathway of you become, something happens and then you become more hypervigilant. And that hypervigilance, which is, just the the collective of sort of whatever your stress responses are. So whether that means you change your behaviors, I know particularly for like Black men, that can mean wearing certain things, presenting yourself a particular way, making sure that you're, speaking slowly and, keeping your volume down, just all of those attitudinal changes that you have to make in order to sort of prevent the next onslaught of violence, which you really can't even prevent because that doesn't have any real rhyme or reason. That collection of behaviors that you take on is what sort of contributes to depression and anxiety among Black adults, is having to continuously hold that and do that. It has an impact. It doesn't explain all of the depression and anxiety that people have in association with police brutality, but it's just one of the ways that we have to sort of live with this reality of ongoing state violence that's just never, that we never really see justice for. We're trying to change ourselves in order to prevent something that we can't really prevent.
Right. That's so interesting that you mentioned that it could potentially have effects on Black children as well. I guess I'm wondering, in hearing your response to that question, is hypervigilance something that can be sort of like passed down or induced by parents at all? Because I know, like, I'm remembering just like parents having conversations with their, especially young Black boys, but young children in general, of like, if you ever have an occurrence with like Black cops, this is what you do. So is there any association in that kind of instance?
I can't. I'm sure the answer is yes. I can't I can't think off the top of my head of a particular study that has like proved this association, but there's been so much work on like having the talk with Black kids and how that talk happens at such a young age, particularly for Black boys. That can happen as young as 3 or 4 years old, because there's been a lot of studies also on sort of the adultification of Black children and how we don't get to be children. We're having to take on sort of the anxieties of our parents who are trying to keep us safe in all of the realms of being a Black child in a white supremacist country. So that can be from policing to, dealing with elders or dealing with clergy or dealing with, just people out in the world and how people perceive you. But also there's the adultification that is put on Black children. So, white adults misidentify how old Black kids are. They always think that they're older than they are. And that also plays a role in how Black boys in particular, but also Black girls, because these sort of are different like mechanisms where Black boys and Black men are more likely to experience more like physical assaults from police and like people who police us, whether they're like, they have a badge or not. So, teachers police you, adults police you, random strangers on the street police you, as we talked about Karen's and the lady in the scene that was acted out. Like people are always policing our movements. And so, and the other side, girls are typically dealing with more psychological assaults, sexual assaults from people in power. And so when children are misidentified or misperceived as older than they are, then they don't get the benefit of youthful mistakes. They don't get the benefit of being kids. They don't get to just run around and play toy guns or play around or run too fast or be in the wrong place or, speak to someone the wrong way or cut their eyes at someone the wrong way. Then they're getting the full weight of the decision making that adults have, the development that adults have. So there's all this intentionality put on children that isn't there, that where white kids get to be kids until they're 25, so it's just a very different situation.
Right. Thank you for that. Kind of while we're on the topic about the ways that gender kind of plays different roles in police brutality, there was a lot of reference to it in our show today, actually. And some of the research that you've been a part of explores the convergence of police brutality with intersectionality and health outcomes for women of color specifically. For those who haven't gotten a chance to read your work, can you talk about some of those findings and like these particular effects that it has on Black women? I know that you talked a little bit about about it before, but if you can expand a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, so, when I was working on my doctorate, I was looking specifically at all the Black women and girls who had been killed by police in between 2000 and 2019. So that's one specific outcome, right? And so, that's 500 plus people in that 20-year span who were killed as a result of a police encounter. But then there's the myriad ways that Black women are assaulted, physically, sexually assaulted by police. There's like this, unspoken conversation about police sexual violence, which you don't talk about sexual violence, period, just across the board. But like with police, it's even worse because it's like, how do you report that? And just the terrorism of like, there's a lot of research about how Black women in particular will call the police because they're experiencing domestic violence or interpersonal violence, and how the police don't believe them. They escalate the situation, or they consider them equal aggressors, and then they get arrested at the same time, right? And so, that's all police violence, because you're trying to get help, you're trying to like get resources, and you're just being policed instead. But what was notable, I think, for me about looking at all of these Black women and girls who've been killed in that time period was that, I don't know, I didn't have, no one's done an analogous study for Black men or any other sort of demographic group, but I went and looked through every single case for why the police were called and whether these Black women or girls were the target of the police in that, sort of encounter holistically. And I think more than half of that sample of women, or that half of that group of women, were not the intended target of the police encounter. So they died as a result of aggressive policing against somebody else. And, so like the example we all have is Breonna Taylor. She was asleep at home. They weren't even looking for her, and she ends up dead. And it just kept happening over and over again. And it's like, I just kept looking at case after case, and it's just like, policing makes the entire community unsafe. And so while Black men are usually the ones who are specifically targeted with the physical violence and the death, we're in community with each other. So all those police chases, all of those shootings, all of those no-knock warrants, all of those things that, bust down doors and physically assault Black men, there's, their parents and their spouses and their partners and their children and their girlfriends, or just like their community members who are all living in those same communities that are getting killed by stray bullets, or having, long-term health effects by being startled by, bounty hunters, or having to like drive in your neighborhood and someone decides that traffic ticket was worth speeding, chasing someone for a high-speed chase just because, they ran away, and instead of just letting it go, they just had to pursue them, and so, I looked at Black women and girls specifically, but it really became clear, like, policing makes the entire community unsafe, and it just, we're all in community with each other. And so it just deteriorates bonds and safety. And it's a lot of it was so pointless. There were very few cases where somebody was in pursuit of someone who like murdered somebody or like viciously assaulted somebody. It was all out of like, you didn't stop at the stop sign, or, your license plate was expired, and a lot of stolen cars, which is like, at the end of the day, like, nobody wants their car stolen, but it's like, what are we doing in order to recover that car? And most of the time, those high-speed chases, the car gets totaled anyway. So was it worth this many people dying and this many people having long-term health complications as a result of the injuries they sustained in that chase?
Thank you. That was like, I feel like you were bringing up a lot of points that I had never thought about before. Of like, of course, there's the impact of like someone being killed by a police officer, but just the long-term offense of like having to witness a high-speed chase, as you were talking about, or just like the unsafety in the home of having that moment happen. Like, I feel like we don't really talk that much about it. So thank you so much for like doing that work and really bringing that to light. Kind of a follow-up to that question is, have you come across any research that explores how police brutality affects gender nonconforming people more specifically? And if not, do you see the field kind of moving towards that mode of research?
I know that it exists. I look, when I was doing my own like deciding who to include and not include, these are all deceased people, and so these database, like there's not good databases for any of this, but like the ones that exist, they just sort of put trans, right? It's like male, female, trans. And so there weren't that many individuals to begin with. And that's not gender nonconforming necessarily, but even in that, it was like having to go through and figure out via news articles who was a trans woman, who was trans man. And even then, journalists will dead name people because they'll just go with legal names. And so police brutality research, I think on the whole, does a poor job of addressing small populations of people because they like to do things that are like big numbers, statistics, easy to plug in. And so, populations that are smaller tend to get ignored. And that's very true for gender nonconforming people, especially when you reduce that down to Black gender nonconforming people. There has been research done on Black trans women in particular being killed. I think just as within the larger category of them just being killed, period, whether they were killed by police or by people on the street. But I'm not sure how much work has been done on gender nonconforming individuals and police harassment or police killings in general. I would think that someone like Andrea Ritchie, who does a lot of work in that space, probably has done some of that. But it's hard because a lot of times the only time we find out that something happened is if it gets reported in the news or if their family reports it. And if you're talking about the news, they don't do a very good job of dealing with anything that doesn't fall in sort of the hetero, cis hetero world of naming and identifying people. But also if folks are not accepted by their families, which is often the case, if something happens to them, they're not necessarily out there advocating for them in the same way that would allow us to even know, that particular story in that way. And so I think in a lot of those ways, those stories get further marginalized.
Thank you for that. I feel like that was very an insightful take. I feel like there are so many pieces of this conversation where I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that in that way. So thank you so much for that. I guess my last question is, as a person who's constantly researching, the adverse effects of police brutality for Black people, and people of color in general, how do you take care of yourself and continue to do this work?
Well, when when I was working on this, for my dissertation, it was in the throes of the pandemic. Everyone was at home. So that was also a lot. So, I live by myself. So I do a lot of gardening, which can be really cathartic and digging and weeding and stuff like that. I have taken a break from doing that for the last 6 to 8 months or so. I think needed to get away from the intensity of it all, although I'm trying to go back to it because I think that those stories are important. And I feel like I have some work that I did with one of the victims' families that I had in my data set. And I would really like to get that story published because they shared a lot of intimate details with me, but it's hard. Something that worked before doesn't work the next time. And then even this summer, it's been 5 million degrees. So I can't go outside.
Talk about it.
So, gardening isn't a thing and everything is dead. And so it's, it's just, I don't know that I take the greatest care of myself, but what I've tried to do is just try to find something that is completely not me sitting down and looking at anything detached from social media or the computer, that doesn't require any thought of that. So, painting something or gardening or something artistic or just in my body to get out of it. But it's hard to do, and it's infuriating because, when George Floyd was murdered during the pandemic, everybody was really on board. And, I think a lot of us had hoped that this might have some sort of long-term concrete changes. But of course, you get whiplash from it all. And now everything's opened back up, and like, the like rush to publish and fund and like do and legislate was a moment, and then like folks acted like, okay, well that ended, but like
Right.
on an average 3 people a day are being killed by the police, and like countless others are being assaulted and harassed and traumatized, and so it doesn't end. And so I think having to realize that this is a long-term project, and like it's urgent, but it's not urgent in the way that people responded to it before, in a sense where they were like, let's do it all right now and then like forget
Right.
about it. It's got to be a sustained effort in order for us to really, end this system.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I think for the next part of this community conversation, I just want to open it up to some of the actors and community members who are still on the Zoom. So people feel free to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable in doing so. But Jay, I just want to ask a question to you, but also anybody who's still on the Zoom about this topic. And I'll give people a moment to trickle in. Thank you all for still being here. I guess my final sort of couple questions in that is in thinking about social media and the way that it has played a role, especially during the pandemic, in this kind of topic. Kind of just wondering, what is some ways that people engage with this topic, engage with police brutality using social media over the years, and like how has that kind of changed pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during the pandemic, outside of the pandemic? Yeah.
You want me to start?
Yeah, you could answer, anyone could answer.
Okay. I used to be a lot more plugged in to all of the social media posts about, who was killed, what's going on. And now if someone says someone was killed or hints at something and there's a video, I immediately scroll past it. Like I literally can't do it anymore. I think that we all hoped that seeing it would help people believe that it was real. And I think from 2016 to 2020, like it became very clear that that wasn't a mechanism for changing minds. And so what I do use social media for is connecting with people who are doing work to keep up with like what's going on and like what's being written, and just the ideas and thoughts around it that I hadn't really thought about, particularly especially with the abolition space. Like I was getting there on my own, but to hear it become so like front and center, and like there were so many other people who were thinking about it and theorizing about it and actually putting it into practice, I think that's where I tend to like put my social media energy in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say reflecting on that, I was reflecting on that recently, and I'd also say I'm similar to kind of Jay in the position of being, I guess in the past year, just disengaged from social media. I found that during the pandemic, it was just very hard. And a lot of times, if you're scrolling through like a Twitter timeline and things like that, you're honestly like re-traumatizing yourself and different things happening. And like, like if you have personal connections to people involved or like protest happening and things like that, it was so good to like know where things are happening and what's on the ground and the actual like unfiltered things that were going on and like information. But at the same time, of course, that can just really be an overload. I think just emotionally for like the I don't know, the depth that people have to like even be in community and things like that. So I've been in that definitely similar position with like things that have happened in the past year. I'm just like, I don't have the capacity for it anymore. And I'm wondering like, so when will like how do I gain that capacity back? Because if I want to continue doing the work, how do I do the work in other spaces and things like that? But I don't know. I also try to use, I guess, the internet to like get informed in other ways or see how other people are helping and things like that. And, as much as infographics really like, simplify things and really just cut out a lot of nuance, and maybe like things like Instagram are not always the best place for mobilizing. I find that other apps can like at least do so. And it's like a good reminder to be like, hey, there's still things to be done. It might not be now, but maybe in the future, or it might not be in a certain capacity, but maybe in another. So I think that I like some sections of social media as a learning tool, but it really is a trap sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what's already been said, I feel like there's this like numbing effect that happens when, or at least for me personally, I had this like very like surprising numbing effect to it, where this is green, the sky is blue, there's a hashtag on my feed, and it was just like that's just how it goes. And so it made it very difficult to engage with that mobilizing and the way that information is passed and spread and things that need to be shared, and things that need to be talked about when it just feels like it's a daily occurrence. Like it got to the point for me personally where it started feeling like the weather report, and I was like, okay, I don't want to know the weather. I'm just go outside. I'm gonna see what happens. And so I don't, just echoing what's already been said about, how good of a tool it is to get the information out there, but it is very much I scroll or I'll look at it and I'll feel some type of way. And so there's road rage happening. I'll look at it and I'll feel some type of way and I'll just keep going. Um, it's one of those things I've never really had the answers to. So also if there's any like answers or suggestions on how to phase out that burnout and phase in more action, would love if we can share a little bit of that too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Cyril. That was definitely going to be my next question, so good segue. Definitely wanted to spend some more time of just like crowdsourcing some ways, some tools to like take care of ourselves as we continue to engage in this topic, because it needs to be talked about, as many things do. But like just sort of how do we continue to be able to show up as we're educating ourselves and others? I think I just wanted to start on this little question. I think for me, Jay, you mentioned like just having to scroll past some of those videos of it, like it mentions it. Honestly, that was really helpful for me as well, especially during like the pandemic. I would just be like, I no longer have capacity to like watch Black people die on my screen, actually. So I'm gonna scroll past it. I'm gonna read the name, I'm gonna read the story. But I'm gonna scroll past it. And I think having that autonomy of like you actually don't need to witness it, and witnessing death on your screen actually isn't normal, although we've normalized it a lot. And I think there's a lot of discourse about like the age of just like news and websites and TV of being able to witness people die in front of you. But yeah, just being able to like take a second and say no to the traumatic things that we're being forced to witness.
I think, it's hard regardless of where you sort of insert yourself. For a while, and even this I had to stop doing for a bit, but where I sort of put my energy was um in having conversations with people who have a thought around it, but they're not really deeply informed about how policing functions, how police brutality works. Um, and so, because the reality is, the sensationalism of seeing the violence isn't going to move legislation. It's not changing people's minds. And so really getting into some of the like minutia of like what is policing on a day-to-day basis? How much money are we spending on this? When people start bringing up like, I live in New Orleans, so it's like, we got, storm preparation and we've got, poor infrastructure and all of these things. And it's like, oh, you don't like the infrastructure. Well, let me tell you how much money our city budget is allocating towards infrastructure versus policing or versus libraries versus education. And sort of taking a little bit of a step back and talking about it from a more like strategic standpoint of like not getting necessarily into the emotionality of how awful it is and how traumatizing it is, but like part of the problem is like most of these cities, municipal budgets, the majority of too much goes to one thing, right? Whereas like everything else sort of has to deal with the crumbs of it, of the leftover. So, I sort of approached it that way, or having conversations that, I have older parents, like boomer silent generation parents, and like they still sort of believe that, they still have some hope that it can be reformed. And so it's like when they bring it up, I'll like find one thing to like try to change their mind about, not having a full-on argument, but just like one thing. And so I think taking that approach has helped me stay engaged and work towards change, but not be in the like constant like trauma response of having to see it and like ingest the like what's happening immediately. But even that can be tiresome, especially now, because there's been so much backlash to whatever progress was made in 2020 and 2021.
Jay, I want to thank you so much for being here this evening. I guess one quick question I have for you is, how do we, how do we as citizens create change and create more awareness on how those budgets are being allocated? How can we, get a hold of our legislators? How can we, what is an action item that we can do that will make our communities more aware of how our tax dollars are being used towards policing and the changing of it?
This is hard because the legislative process is so boring. It's like nobody wants to read it. I don't want to read it. And like I got curious about it because I had never looked at my city's budget book, but they are all public documents. So you should be able to go look at your city's document and be like, what's the budget for this year? And you should be able to pull up a PDF that goes through all the allocations. And I haven't looked at other cities, but if it's anything like New Orleans, it's like set up so that you don't necessarily see all of the places where police are funded. Like we have the NOPD's budget, but then there's like other line items tucked away in like the mayor's office and like somewhere else that also is still funding the policing apparatus. So for me, it was like an interesting exercise to like go through it. But obviously everyone doesn't want to do that. So like trying to work in partnership with people who do want to do stuff like that to then translate it into information that's digestible to the majority of people. And it's still hard because even though most places should have periods of public comment for each sort of chunk of the budget, they don't necessarily have to listen to the public, like to your public comment, right? So you may go up there and stand up and say, I don't want to do this. I want us to put more money over here. And then your city council can kind of do whatever they want to do. But so that's why I think it gets so tiresome, because you feel worn down. It's like it's all these like little baby steps and trying to like engage a system that inevitably doesn't want to change. And so I still think people should do it, but it's like kind of that thing where people say like, just go vote. Like that's not an answer. Like that's not a solution. It's an action that needs to be done in concert with other things. But I don't think I know the majority of people don't know what's in the city budget, because the city budget process is terrible. Nobody wants to participate in it. And like it's the same sort of 10 people who do it every year. So that's one thing. And I think it needs to be translated better. So for folks who are really good at sort of infographics or just sort of the bite-sized things of like, here's what your money's going to, but that's still hard. I think folks who have worked in movement building know that there's always like multiple strategies that have to be done all at once. And even still, most people are gonna like fizzle out. So I'm not really sure what the answer is, but that is one strategy. And it's going to have to go on for years and years and years, because every year there's another priority, and you don't ever know how your city council, you don't ever know who's funding your city council members, and the unions, and there's just all these politics behind it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask you a quick question? And it's a half-formed question, so forgive me if it doesn't make sense. But I was thinking as we were talking about social media, not to go back, but I was thinking a lot about what role the like I don't want to say actual, but like public media has. The thing that when you talked about George Floyd, and that whole situation over the pandemic, what struck me is that like that was on that was on CNN, that was on all of the mainstream whatever news forms. Same thing with Breonna Taylor to a lesser extent, but it was still. So I'm interested in what, and as we talk about having to scroll past seeing the trauma and having to kind of focus on doing that one thing, what role do you feel like mainstream media, CNN, all of those big like news reporters have in this fight? Is it better for us to be able to see those things happen on the news? Does that spread the word better? Is it better to keep it on social media? Does that make it less important? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm of two minds about it. And I don't know how old you are, but like I distinctly remember when Eric Garner was killed, because that was the first time they really mainstream media really played a video and kept it on a loop. And I think at the time, like that shook me a lot. Like that altered my like future course of what I was gonna do, because I had never seen it. Because I didn't grow up in a community that was heavily policed. So this wasn't like a day-to-day reality for me. So that was something like I knew it happened, I believed it happened, but like seeing it on the news was a lot. I think much like we've already been talking about, there's like there's a threshold where and we've well past surpassed that, where it's now just a public spectacle. And it's very similar to how lynchings used to be picnics, right? Like people would go attend and it was like fun and like whatever. And so we passed the point where it's now shocking to the majority of Americans, to now where it's like, you know, the discourse, the politicization since, post-Trump era, where, people can say the things that they probably only could have said in Jim Crow, to the same level without being ostracized. I think we've hit a point where it's like, I don't know what the value is of it on mainstream media. And also mainstream media now functions so much like everything is breaking news, and it'll be breaking news for 12 hours. And so it's just about ratings. And there's not a lot of discussion about it anymore. Like I think when Eric Garner was killed, and I may be misremembering this also, I feel like there was more conversation about what is going on, like how silly is he selling loose cigarettes, like what are we doing? And now it's just like breaking news, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and then there was a protest, and then there was like a fire, and then there was this, and like there's no conversation about like what is happening, and then sort of the response is always just like, we want peace, and like it's all flat and useless. And so I don't know. I don't know that there's a good answer for that, because also social media is so segmented, and it's so, you see what you see, but you don't know what other people are seeing or what they're not seeing. And so even then, that's not necessarily a vehicle for reaching the majority of people, because I'm not seeing what, Farmer Joe from Idaho looks like. His social media is going to look different than mine does. And so those voices may never get to hit that algorithm. And so I think it's a both and, but both places are so fraught and so like the discourse is irresponsible for across the board. And I think the bigger issue, I think, is that we need to be teaching each other how to read what's being said, what's not being said, how it's being said, because the mainstream media has to write their bylines a particular way, and it always sort of pacifies what police do, because they still want to be in partnership with police. And then social media can sometimes just be wrong, and that gets passed around 50 million times before anyone can fact check it. So it's like, I think the bigger issue is, how do we teach each other how to be literate about how the messages are communicated, particularly because now it's really hard to figure out what the source is, for anything, and it may not be a source, it just may be fake. So it's just, I don't know. I don't have a well-formed answer to your question.
Thank you so much, everyone. I feel like this was a very fruitful conversation. Thank you, Jay, for your time and your wisdom in this moment. I think just as we begin to wrap up, do you have anywhere where we can continue to engage with the research that you've done or follow the work that you continue to do?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, my burnout has resulted in me not publishing anything because I'm tired.
Real.
But there's a lot of great work that has been written from, Andrea Ritchie, who I already mentioned, Mariame Kaba, um, a book called No More Police. There's a book called that just came out, and I'm gonna forget the title. But it's like I'll remember later and send it to you. But it's
Yes,
a
please
book,
do.
a book about abolition and what it actually means, in practice, and like what does it mean to create community. And so I think that there's a lot of great work already out there that can be accessed, that isn't mine, but eventually, hopefully mine will also be out there. So just keep my name in your Google searches at some point. But yeah, I think the conversation really needs to start shifting away from how are all the ways that we are being killed and traumatized and maimed to what is the world that we actually want to live in, and how do we tangibly implement that? And I do think people are unfortunately more open to hearing like the conversation about infrastructure than they are about not killing Black people. Like, even if those two things end up working together, like if we put more money in infrastructure and inevitably take it away from the police or into our schools or into higher wages or into better policies, they will eventually make safer communities, and downstream we will stop being killed. I don't know. It's an unfortunate reality.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end our show on. Thank you so much for that, and for everyone for being a part of this conversation and for lending your talents and your time. I really appreciate it. Be sure to continue with BRTW, as we will have more Melanated Mondays coming up, which you can view on YouTube, where you're probably viewing this. You can also find us at our website, blackrevolutionarytheaterworkshop.org, and that is theater with an R-E. We are also the BRTW on Instagram and Twitter, and just Black Revolutionary Theater Workshop on Facebook. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your night and continue to educate yourselves. And yeah, bye. Thank you.